Hi, so the poem that I chose to read today is There Are Birds Here by Jamal May. It starts off with an italicized for Detroit. The poem starts out, there are birds here, so many birds here, is what I was trying to say. When they said those birds were metaphors for what is trapped between buildings and buildings. No. The birds are here to root around for bread the girls' hands tear and toss like confetti. No. I don't mean the bread is torn like cotton, I said confetti. And no, not the confetti a tank can make from a building. I mean the confetti a boy can't stop smiling about, and no, his smile isn't much like a skeleton at all. And no, his neighborhood is not like a war zone. I'm trying to say his neighborhood is as tattered and feathered as anything else, as shadow pierced by sun and light parted by shadow dance as anything else, but they won't stop saying how lovely the ruins, how ruined the lovely children must be in that birdless city. The very first poetry term that I picked out was the use of tone. I felt like when I first read the poem, the tone was to me very mysterious, but also it was very like spot on. Like he was trying to be serious, and I felt his intense emotions in the poem, which I thought really was conveyed well through his tone. An example of this is when he said that the young boy is not a skeleton and that his neighborhood isn't filled with bad things like war. The tone that he set for that was so powerful, and it was a little somber, and I feel like it left me feeling emotional because, people perceive Detroit as this horrible place, and like these kids have such a hard problem growing up there, which I'll touch on that in my analysis of the poem. But I mean, you could tell his tone that he set, you could feel his emotions. He set that tone of like, no, like that's not how it is. You think you know how it is, but it's not. And I think that his use of tone, if the tone wasn't the same, I don't think the poem would be perceived the way it was. The second poetry term that I thought worked really well in this poem is the use of free verse. So there's no rhyming, there's no rhyme scheme, there's no specific meter that he used. So I perceive this as a free verse style, which I thought was the best choice that he could have chosen for this. The style really adds to the emotion along with the tone, because the author really had free reign to express how he felt. He didn't have to worry about rhyming or stanzas. He didn't have to worry about following all these rules. The free verse really let him just be able to put out his emotions and just let him say how he felt without having to not make it corny, but in a way make it kind of corny, because it's something so powerful that he feels passionate about that rhyming kind of would have kind of just put the reader off, I feel like. I feel like it wouldn't have been as raw, I think is the word to use. And then the last one that I found was diction, I think is how you pronounce it. But what it is it's all about how the author chooses the words and how those words affect how the poem is viewed. So it's like when you have a poem that's somber, it has somber words. When you have a poem that's happy, it has a lot of happy words. I felt like he chose a lot of words to put that very strong, raw emotion when he said no, period. He did that repeatedly in the poem. And also by saying, it's not this, it's this. Not the confetti, I mean the confetti a boy can't stop smiling about. So he's saying like it's not one thing, it's this. And I felt like the use of those words conveyed a bigger picture to the reader, because to me, Detroit can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And his use of words really made the reader know, no, I don't want you to interpret this. It's not for the reader's interpretation. I'm telling you that it's not confetti like you blow up a building and you have building particles falling all over the place. It's confetti, like happy confetti, like a parade confetti, you know. So to me, it really was him trying to get away from the stigma, get away from how the reader might interpret confetti and interpret, you know, birds in general being in Detroit. He's saying there are birds here. Like, I'm not going to let you sit there and say, are there birds here? Like, no, there definitely is birds here. And then the last part that I'm going to talk about is how the poem expresses emotion or human experience, and why did I pick this poem. I think that this poem really shows how people from Detroit feel about Detroit. I'm from Detroit. I was raised there pretty much my whole life, and I am so incredibly proud of being from Detroit. I will tell everyone I know how much I love Detroit, and I have so many funny stories from there because it's a little crazy, but I know that people's stigma, especially where I live in Georgia, it's so far from the north that the stigma really is like crime and just like murders, and people think it's dirty, and it's like, it's not like that at all. Like, you get that everywhere. It's not just Detroit. I don't know why Detroit has such a stigma like that, but when I say, oh yeah, I'm from Detroit, people think like I'm like a hardcore thug, and I'm like, what? I'm afraid of spiders. Like, I'm not a hardcore thug. And so to me, that's why I chose this poem, because I felt a very strong connection to it, because I know what people think about Detroit. People think, you know, if you were to say confetti, your mind probably wouldn't have just gone to just confetti. It might have gone to, you know, like dirty air or a building being blown up, like he said. And it's not what it is. You know, it's such a nice place, and people think of kids there, they feel sorry for people who grew up in Detroit. And me growing up in Detroit, I'm like, why are you feeling sorry for me? Like, it's such a wonderful place to grow up. It's normal, just like every other place. And in here, he said his neighborhood is as tattered and feathered as anything else. To me, I think he's talking about his younger self. Because I look around, I live in Atlanta now, and I look around and I'm like, okay, I see all of these places that are just as tattered and as torn as Detroit, and yet Detroit has such a stigma of being like the lowest of the lowest towns and being dirty and like full of crime, and it's like, I don't know why that it's like that. So that's why I really related to this poem. And people thinking, you know, there aren't birds in Detroit because like it's all this concrete and all these buildings, but there are birds in Detroit. There's happy people in Detroit living normal lives, happy lives, just like anywhere else across America. So that's what I got from this poem. The other thing I got was, a boy can't stop smiling about, and no, his smile isn't much like a skeleton at all. And to me, I perceive that line as being people are hungry, because that's another stigma that I've noticed with Detroit, is people thinking that, you know, they're poor and they're hungry and they don't eat. And it's sad. It really is sad, because it's not how it is at all anywhere, like anywhere near there. And that's why that line really stuck out to me. And when he says at the very end of the poem, how lovely the ruins, how ruined the lovely, children must be in that birdless city. Because people really do think that when you're from there, you're damaged. It's a ruined city full of ruined people, full of sad, you know, lowest of the low lives. That's not how it is at all, like, at all. And so that's why this poem really means a lot to me. And I love this poem and what it stands for where I'm from. And I personally think it really shows a lot of emotion. And when I first read it, I was reading it on my way to work. I was using like a YouTube video that was reading it to me, and I teared up because I was like, that's crazy how real and raw that is. And it's showing his experience as a human being from Detroit, and that stigma that follows him. And I think that that's, you know, you can't replicate that and just say like, oh yeah, I'm from Detroit. Like, no, you have to experience it, I think, to know it fully. Because to me, him trying to break down that stigma and saying, like, you can't think what you think. I'm going to tell you what to think. Like, he doesn't leave anything up to the imagination in this poem. He really tells it straightforward to break down what people think about him and about what people think about Detroit. And to me, that is the utmost raw personal experience that you can have, is trying to defend yourself against the world and defending your city, because like I said, I'm very prideful of being from Detroit, so like I will go to the end of the earth to defend my city and defend Detroit and say, hey, Detroit's awesome, you can't say that. And so, I mean, this poem was just really wonderful, and I loved everything it stood for, and I loved reading it and interpreting it and digging deep into it, because it felt like on the surface I was like, wow, this is an amazing, awesome poem. But then once I really dug deep and like really broke it down like line by line, I was like, this is so much deeper than I thought it was, because he really is putting his whole heart and feelings into it. And when you read it, you really do realize, like, this is how this man is feeling and has felt for a long time, and he wants everyone around him to know that this is how it really is. There are birds here, people are happy, it's a great city, and it's just a great place to live. Yeah, so I hope everybody enjoyed my poetry reading and interpretation. I think trying to check out his poems. I've actually read a few more of his poems a few nights ago, and I fell down a wormhole. He has a book, and it's great. But now I'm done plugging Mr. May. I hope you guys have a wonderful night, and thank you for watching.